right. I think everything's up and running now. Good to see everybody here. There's 9 viewers immediately. I think that is the highest so far. I think 5 or 6 is the highest it's ever been. The second that I started. All right. So before I get started, before I start answering questions, couple things. First, I can't answer any questions about the scenario that I took, so please don't ask me. I'll just have to ignore it, because otherwise I get in a bunch of trouble. I'd love to talk about it. I really would, but I can't. You know, the other thing is, it's good to be back and see so many people here after being on for so long. I've missed making YouTube videos, so it's good to be back here. I got a few that I'm going to release very, very soon. All right, so the first question that got sent in, and feel free to send in as many, whatever questions you have. There's no bad questions. I certainly had plenty of them myself. So I really wish I could attend. What are the majority of CTAs doing that you're not interested in? Did you feel that you missed passing due to missing something? Okay, so as far as what do other CTAs do that I'm not particularly interested in myself, a lot of CTAs kind of end up getting into more of the sales process, right? Which is not something that I'm necessarily completely opposed to being a part of. I certainly am a part of that, being a consultant from time to time, but it's not something that I want to focus on like every moment, every moment of my day. I really like doing the development, if that's not very obvious from this channel. I really love doing the development side of things. I like actually, getting really, really involved with the project work that I'm a part of. And, what I've seen through talking to, I think at least 20 CTAs now is that most of them, after you get a CTA, you really become very sales centric, right? Your job is basically just to come up with these estimates, which again, I do some of, but that's like really your main focus, these estimates, these oral presentations that you do, and things along those lines. So that's one aspect that I didn't really love, that, you don't really know until you start getting into it. This is kind of where your career is likely headed, at least if you want, to be in that highest pay grade that the cert kind of earns you. And do you feel that you miss passing due to missing something? I don't particularly think that I missed anything necessarily. I feel like and Salesforce has kind of got their own opinions of about this, but I feel like the biggest factor for myself was the length of the scenario. So if you take a look at most of the public scenarios, the scenarios that were out there that have been made public, that are retired scenarios that prior CTAs took and either passed or failed, most of those scenarios are like 26, 27. I think maybe on the high end it was like 2,800 words. So I had been kind of prepping for, like a maximum of around 3,000 words. And you don't think that, a few hundred words or whatever might make the difference, but when it all comes down to that 3-hour time frame, every word counts, because every word is meaningful, right? It's all a little detail in that scenario. So the bigger that the scenario is, and the more words of the scenario is, the harder it is. So I think that was really the biggest issue, is that it was just so long that I had to process so much of it, and there was more to kind of remember and take in and whatnot, that it just made it really, my time management process that I got down was not quite what it needed to be for the length of scenario that I got. And, I was telling somebody the other day, they asked me, why does the number matter? Well, it matters because of those things, but it's kind of like, I think most countries out there are familiar with baseball, right? You go in you play baseball, and as a pitcher, your goal is to throw 3 strikes, and they'll be out, the batter's out. Well, if a bunch of CTAs get a scenario and they're used to seeing, 26 to 2,800 words, then that's your 3 strikes, right? And then it's like, if you up the words because you have to retain that much more information, it's kind of like asking some pitchers to throw 4 strikes to get somebody out, which, it is what it is. I'm sure they try to make this as fair as they possibly can, or at least I hope they do, but it's kind of how it feels with that time management stuff, because you really try to maximize it as much as you can. I changed a lot since I last saw you. I got a haircut, and this channel has made quite a bit of money while I was gone, so there's some new equipment around that makes things look a little bit nicer, and in the new videos I think that'll be pretty apparent. Hey Matt, really appreciate you doing this. Don't have questions yet, but I'm interested to see what others ask. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. It's good to see you. Good to see you too, Pedro. You've been around since like day 1 almost, I feel like. So good to see you for sure, man. Does being a developer really make a difference for the CTA? I know that you can become a system and application architect without writing a line of code. I would say, unfortunately, in my opinion, you really don't need to know code at all, like almost nothing, to pass the CTA. You need to be really, when you're taking this exam, it's more about understanding which products Salesforce offers, what objects are out-of-the-box objects are appropriate for certain situations, and then the limitations of the platform. So it's kind of like, the only time you're even gonna suggest custom code is in situations where you're absolutely certain that the configuration won't work. And there's, it's almost goes against you if you suggest too much code, or you even go too in depth about the code. That kind of will work against you. So you definitely don't want to. It's almost, I would say, in some respects, it's almost to your detriment if you know too much code, because you know all of these little problems that you could get into that may steer you away from things that I feel like, I don't know. But no, to answer that question, you don't need to be a developer at all. And, it's not necessarily going to hurt you, but you got to really remember to stay high level, at least from a code. Code is like ultra low level. You got to stay at a much higher level when you're presenting at for a CTA board. Now that you mention hands-on development and architecture being more abstract, high level, do you lose attention to detail by switching focus to the big picture? I don't. So you not necessarily. You won't necessarily lose attention to the detail by switching to the big picture. It kind of just all depends on the individual, right? So I think what happens over time is that CTAs, or really high-level technical architects, or CTOs or whatever, they get into this position where they're only allotted time to think at a high level, right? So they start to, over time, have their kind of low-level technical skills start to diminish. which, is another reason that I really like this channel. I really like my other channel, Moonrise Mountain, where I can do a bunch of live stream development, because the higher that I go as a technical architect, the less and less you become involved with truly writing the day-to-day code. And that's something that I actually kind of love. So do you lose attention to the detail? It depends on whether you want to continue to pay attention to that detail, I guess, to some extent. But yeah, you will if you don't upkeep it in your own hours, or you find a situation where you can be a high-level technical architect and do some development. But you might get pretty overwhelmed if you get yourself into that situation. If you enjoy the development side of things more, why did you want to become a CTA? If it was the pay band they're in, do you think that CTAs are overpaid given that they are more focused on sales? I wanted to become a CTA a long time ago because I thought it was even more technical than what I got into, and I thought that it would benefit me on the platform, and it definitely has, right? But I didn't necessarily know that the career shift would necessarily happen in that way. And I'm not trying to blanket statement that for all CTAs. I'm sure not all CTAs are completely sales focused, but I do think that a good quantity of them are. And I think that is to some extent because there are so many customers out there that really, really, really want a CTA to exist to manage their project. And there's just so few of them that they have to kind of like split their time in all these different places. And the best way to kind of split their time and to pay for their their higher salaries is to get them involved in that sales process, to get them making sales, and to get them kind of involved in as many sales as they can to kind of justify the pay. As far as do I think that whether or not they're overpaid, I don't know if there are. To some extent, I think it's amazing how much any of us get paid, myself included, in this career as a developer, as a technical architect on the Salesforce platform in general. It's kind of, I feel very lucky. But as far as do they get overpaid, I guess it depends on your perspective. Most CTAs, I feel like, that I came in contact with, they really have to work for their pay to some extent. It's not like, they're not in the details, but they have to get up and present to these people, and they have to, a lot of time they're staffed on like 8-9 different projects. So it's not an easy job, but to some extent, I do think that all of the certs, not just the CTA cert, but, especially like Developer 1, Developer 2 certs, whatever else that gives you, a little higher pay band. I think that certs are just overhyped or whatever in general. And I say that because, I'm somebody that hires a lot of people, a lot of people. I've interviewed probably several hundred people over the last several years, and I don't look at their certs. I don't care about their certs, and that's primarily because I've found it doesn't really matter. Sometimes it does, but it just as many times it doesn't. So, I don't know. I won't say that they're overpaid, but I think that certs mean less than people give them credit for in general. Love the videos and appreciate your contributions to helping others learn Salesforce. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm very glad they're helpful. Mario G. What are some of the coolest applications of Salesforce you've seen? I saw you created the back end of a game with one of your friends. Would love to hear some of the weird, fun things you've used Salesforce to create. I mean, one of the coolest applications of it for sure has been my good friend, the guy I've worked with for 8 straight years. We've gone from one job to the other because, he's just great to work with. He's a great friend. Matt Hoffman. He made a game called Goosey Guess, and he uses Salesforce as a leaderboard for Goosey Guess, in kind of like a score display system in a Experience Cloud site as well. So it's pretty fun to just get to look at and to, I didn't really do much of the development. He really did all of the development. I just helped him with some questions that he had when he got stuck, to overcome a couple situations. But it was pretty cool to see that for sure. And if you haven't checked out Goosey Guess, it's like $5. It's a pretty entertaining game. Other than that, though, I mean, I've seen some really interesting applications of Salesforce out there. There's been one where Salesforce is literally just an interface for another system, which I thought was a misuse of the system, but it's pretty interesting to see. And I'm sure there's plenty more out there. I got to briefly be introduced to how Twitch uses Salesforce as a platform, and I thought that was pretty interesting as well. It's pretty huge, and anyway, it was pretty interesting how they leveraged it. I googled CTA and it tells me it's call to action. What is CTA? CTA stands for Certified Technical Architect. So Salesforce Certified Technical Architect is kind of revered or whatever as the kind of like highest level certification in Salesforce, and that's because it's really the only one that isn't a multiple choice exam, right? You've got to look at this 10 to 12 page long scenario, and within 3 hours time solve 65 to 70 requirements, and then present that in 40 minutes or 45 minutes, and then get questioned on it for 40 minutes. So it's quite a bit more involved. I mean, my exam lasted 6 hours, so it's a big deal. What is the best way to find the first job in the Salesforce ecosystem these days? It is almost impossible. Mustafa, the best way to find a job in the Salesforce ecosystem, in my opinion, and again, this is just based on my own experience, is to keep applying to any entry-level jobs you can find at the large consulting firms. And I say this because they're intentionally looking for entry-level hires that are cheap, that they can train, right? So I was hired for Salesforce as a Java developer. I was hired at a big firm as a Java developer and then asked to move to Salesforce, and they paid for all of my training, and a whole bunch of other people that were just entry-level developers that they brought in to do Salesforce. They paid for all of their training. They paid for all of their certifications. They gave us people to shadow, to kind of learn Salesforce. So, I think that's the best way. I think there are more openings there than anywhere else. Yeah, like I said, I mean, very grateful to Accenture for ever giving me that opportunity. And honestly, it's been like the greatest, I've said it a million times, but it's really been like the greatest company I could have imagined working for. So that's why I would keep that route. Did Accenture support you to study full time? I saw a statement that you spent over 1,000 hours. That seems like ridiculous, especially with your level of knowledge. They did support an enormous amount of my study time and the exam and everything else. The only thing that I paid for out of pocket was Flow Republic, because I wasn't sure that I was going to be selected for the internal Accenture CTA program. So I wanted to kind of find my own path and figure out how to get there no matter what. So I paid for Flow Republic out of pocket, which at Accenture anyway, they don't reimburse you for, at least not that I'm aware of. They did also give me a lot of PTO or not PTO, but approved training time to study. So I got 3 weeks off prior to the exam to just sit and study. But a lot of those hours were my own hours for sure. I studied probably an average of a few hours a night. I obviously took, I think almost always took the last week of the month off to kind of rest and relax, and that way I didn't burn out. But yeah, they definitely supported me an enormous amount. I would not have done this probably without their support, to some extent. They have an internal CTA training program where I was able to schedule mock sessions with CTAs, and so I was very fortunate that I had this whole training program, all these CTAs that were willing to work with me, and that Accenture, invested in me, right, to do this work and all that. But as far as 1,000 hours being a ridiculous amount of time, I do think to some extent it is a ridiculous amount of time, but I think it's necessary, and it's mostly just because you have 3 hours to solve a lot, and everything that what you solve has to be read or presented in a very particular manner. You have to kind of tell the user story first, and then the technical implementation, and then your reasoning behind why you might have chosen one product over another. And so you kind of have to get this muscle memory down for like any situation that you could get into. So it's kind of at a certain point, I say like the first 500 hours or so, it was really me learning, like memorizing all these different system limitations. And then the next 500 hours or so was really refining the presentation, figuring out all the little niche things in these different products that I may or may not have instantly memorized. And then, really honing in how do I present this in this particular way that they want to see. So it's a lot of time for sure, but it's because of that time limit that you have to invest that amount of time, because everything has to be instant. Like you can't think about it, right? You can't Google it. You can't do anything. You just have to instantly know it. Do you know any CTA that doesn't work in a big consultancy or multinational corporation? Yeah, for sure. I mean, Seb and Johan from Flow Republic, those are good examples of people that didn't. There's a few others that I'm forgetting. I'm forgetting their names off the top of my head. There's one in the SFXD Discord. I don't believe he at least did work at a big multinational company, but most of the ones that I did come in contact with were at the larger firms. And the reason for that, I think, is because the larger firms pay them more money, right? I mean, there's a reason that a lot of people work at the consultancy firms, and that's because the consultancy firms pay the most typically, unless you're going out and doing, contracting on your own. So, most of them worked at larger consultancy firms, but there were, I think, 4, 5 maybe that I met that weren't. So, but most of them are for sure. Lewis asks, did you do the CTA Preparation Workshop, and did you find it useful? I did the CTA 601 Preparation Workshop a very long time ago, in like 2020 or 2019 or something like that. And at the time I found it useful. It is for sure useful in the sense that it like gives you I think what I had was probably different from what you get today. I think it's quite a bit different now, but at the time it was useful. for me to kind of get a very general understanding of what would be expected of me. There's a lot more that actually is expected of you that you don't necessarily get in that CTA 601, at least again when I took it back then. But yeah, it was helpful. I do think it was kind of expensive, but it was helpful, and for me, all of that stuff was covered by my employer. I found even with the Platform Developer 2 exam, as you go slightly higher, resources like Focus on Force, etc., start to move further away from the actual exam. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, so I took Platform Developer 2 after being a developer for 6 years. I felt like it was like really straightforward, so I didn't ever take any Focus on Force. I kind of if I'm being 100% honest, I kind of just YOLO'd the Dev 2 exam. I didn't really study much of anything, so I can't really speak to it. But I do think that the harder the exam is, the fewer materials there are because there's fewer people taking it. And also Salesforce, I think, kind of wants to protect it even more the more important the exam is. So they kind of try to lock it down more and more and more as far as higher, as high as it gets. But yeah, for sure. Did the CTA board give you anything you excelled in these areas and failed in these areas of SF architecture? Something like you get to, yeah. So Kellyanne, maybe? Kellyanne. They did give me that feedback. So the 3 areas I failed, aside from communication, which I'll explain why that didn't go well, they do give you feedback. So I passed 3 sections and then I failed 4. And 3 of the sections that I failed were because I ran out of time, and I had 14 questions left that were unsolved. So what I did, I was hoping I could remedy this in the presentation, which I think to some extent I did, but I was 14 questions short. Again, my scenario was extremely long, in my opinion, based on the public scenarios. But I came up 14 questions short, so I adjusted my presentation so that I'd be left with about 9 minutes. And in those 9 minutes, I solved 13 of the last 14. But because I didn't have them finished ahead of time, they still failed me on them, which I can understand. I get it. It's okay. So those 3 sections I failed. The other 3 sections, system architecture, solution architecture, integration architecture, I passed. And then I failed communication because I had to solve those 14 questions while I was presenting, again, which it did happen for 13 of the 14. But because of that, they failed me on presentation or communication skills. I think that's kind of what I got from it all, from the stuff that they gave me. Let me readjust my screen here a little bit. I've got too many questions and things, or equipment junk is in my way, so I can't see. Heard many get through in their second attempt. I do hear that quite a few people get pass in their second attempt. In fact, I would say the vast majority of CTAs I met, almost almost all of them that I met, except for some of the CTAs that took it a long time ago, like in 2013, 2014, whatever. All the ones that have taken it in the last few years, they failed their first time, or in best case scenario, they got a section retake. Most of, I met 3 people, I believe, that took it 3 or 4 times before they passed. So, but truthfully, I don't really have a desire to retake this exam after my own experience, and that's because I feel like to some extent the exam is taking the exam is kind of like betting on a roulette wheel. You can come very prepared, and then based on the scenario you get, you do better or worse, right? And the reason that you do better or worse is, because of being more familiar with an industry. Maybe it's sales or service cloud centric, and that's really easy for most people. Or maybe you get something that's more like health or manufacturing centric, and that's much less familiar to people. And at the same time, you could get a scenario that's 2,600 words. You could get a scenario that's 3,400 words. You could get a scenario that's even longer than that. I really don't know what the upper end of the scenarios are, right? So it's kind of like a spin of the roulette wheel. Do you want to try it again? Hopefully you get a shorter scenario, or one that's more in your wheelhouse or whatever else. To me, I don't really want to sit through another 6-hour exam. I gave it a shot. It was kind of fun to do, but I don't really want to do it a second time. It's just really not really what I'm interested in. I don't really want to shut down this channel again for another 6 to 9 months, and I don't want to stop doing all the other things that I would personally prefer to do development wise and whatnot. So could you please share your approach for studying for each architect certification? Each certification entails a substantial amount of information, including various settings that need to be memorized. So Manju, good question. Truthfully, when I was studying for the architect certification, there was the architect certifications. I think I did those in 2018, 2019, something like that. All I did were the trail mixes that Salesforce provided. I don't think I have the notebook that I took my notes in. Yeah, it's not over here. But basically what I did is I had a notebook. I did the trailheads. I wrote down everything. I clicked into the, at the end of most trailhead modules, they actually have the technical documentation. Truthfully, that's what I spent the most time on. I clicked the technical documentation at the end of the trailhead modules and then go read them and kind of write down what I found, because the technical documentation is so much better. And it's more in line with what you're actually going to see on the exam than in what's in the trailheads. So that's kind of what I did for the different architect certifications that lead up to the CTA. Did you feel that the CTA exam was somewhat confrontational, high pressure environment? I don't really know. I mean, I have a little bit mixed feelings about how the CTA exam is done. Did I feel like it was high pressure? I kind of went into the exam, in my opinion, pretty calm, because I'd done it so many times. I've taken a lot of tests. Ultimately it's just another test. When I got down to it and I was 14, I realized I was going to come up short. I was a little, I could feel a little pressure then, because I was trying to figure out, well, what do I do to remedy this? Can I even remedy this? Did I just waste all this time? Which ultimately I found out I did, right? But I didn't necessarily feel like it was confrontational, but I do feel like, when the judges ask you questions, right? But I do feel like to some extent that the judges, it is very easy for the judges to have a different interpretation than you. And I do think that, there's very likely, I have no idea whether my judges were this way, but I think it's very likely that there are judges that have a different take on the scenario than you, that will be extremely harsh because your take on the scenario is different, even if it's maybe correct. And I think that varies judge by judge. And again, I have absolutely no proof to back that up. But, you could have one judge that's a little more lenient than another judge. So there's a little bit of again, a spin of the roulette wheel with your judges too. Did you get a more lenient one? Did you get a harder one? Did you get one that's understanding that, they got a lot of time to solve this scenario and think about it, and they have the answer key, and you got 3 hours, and you've never seen this before? All of that kind of comes into play. So I think to some extent, like my architect evaluation that I had before the board, it's a little less formal, but I feel like, I definitely got somebody that was more understanding of, you have very little time, you've barely seen this. I did solve that whole scenario. But again, I have no idea. I do think there's this part of me, and again, there's no way to ever prove this, and I have absolutely no idea if this would ever be true. But there is this little part, I think, of everybody that takes a CTA exam. It's not me. I'm not the only one that has voiced this concern, I guess, is that all of these people judging you are CTAs, and maybe there's no one else to judge you but a CTA. But at the same time, if a CTA passes another CTA, then their CTA cert may become less valuable. So are there CTAs that judge that maybe don't want to pass candidates? Maybe. Again, no proof to back that up, but there's a thing in the back of your mind. There's all these things, right? Like, could you get a more lenient CTA? Did you get a CTA that's happy that day? Did you get a CTA that wants to pass you? Did you get a CTA that's more worried about, their own market value? All those kind of things. So confrontational, not necessarily. They were pretty calm, collected, but there were a couple areas where it felt like I had a different take on what was written in the scenario than they did, and I'm sure there were some things that they definitely didn't agree necessarily with me about. How many certs experience have you seen is required to start your own consultant company doing Salesforce consulting? Just curious if you've seen any patterns. That's a good question. I don't really have an answer to. I have no desire to start my own consultant firm. I would say it probably doesn't matter how many certs you have, but because ultimately it's going to come down to your sales and networking and marketing skills for your consulting company. But it definitely plays a factor in a lot of contracts, at least for bigger clients. Smaller clients, I don't know that they necessarily care, but the bigger clients, they definitely care. So if your goal is to get out there and hook a gigantic client, you'll probably want a decent amount of certs for sure. What that number is, I can't really tell you. Probably at least 10. If you're going out on your own and trying to get a big client. If you're getting a smaller client, I think it's a lot less of a thing. Orlando's asking also, I guess project complexity is not found in similar, even most medium-sized companies, perhaps. Maybe I'm missing something, but yeah, complexity, it depends on the company, for sure. Like you can be staffed on a smaller or medium-sized company that can actually be kind of complex from a development standpoint, but from a full system architecture standpoint, typically they aren't crazy complicated in that sense. They don't have 50 systems to integrate with, but that's not to say that I have seen a couple smaller clients that have 7 systems to integrate with, so it's not necessarily a large client thing. You can have small and medium clients that are really complex, actually. Do you think you will be able to create a series on architect education on coding with the force? I will probably eventually do a bunch more architect videos for sure. I actually have quite a few in mind that I want to get out the door around when you should use particular objects, the certain limitations of the platform in different areas, and a handful of those things. But yeah, there'll definitely be some architecture videos that'll come out over the course of the next year for sure. Orlando says, for example, Red Cross is the size of a multinational, although a nonprofit. Still, I'm sure has a lot of complexity for CTA to be needed. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. There are definitely nonprofits that are large, and even not-for-profits that are very large. That, I mean, like I've done this for a long time. I've seen a lot of clients, big, small, although and medium, although most of my focus has been on the ultra large companies. But yeah, I mean, even the small ones, like a couple hundred users or 50 users, I've seen some crazy complex things. So it's not necessarily limited to just the ultra huge companies that need a good technical architect to be staffed for sure. I've seen some small companies that stood up a Salesforce instance that didn't have a technical architect and had virtually no Salesforce experience, and it wasn't good. I mean, it worked to their credit, but when they started expanding upon it and wanted to kind of move more in a different direction or expand on an application they built, it was really challenging for them. Do you think that the CTA exam is subjective in nature? I think to some extent it is subjective, right? Because ultimately you have 3 CTAs that are making the final call. So you could have 3 CTAs that don't like, that hate your scenario, for your solution to the scenario for some reason. Maybe not hate, but they just don't like it, right? Whereas if you had been given 3 other CTAs, they might be more lenient and hear you out, right? And there are some things, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, to some extent, for sure, I think it is subjective, and it comes down to maybe who you get as a judge. But at the same time, I'd like to think that they all kind of follow the same rubric, and they are all kind of trained in the same way, and so maybe it's less subjective. But I do think that no matter what you do, no matter how you train them, no matter what rubric you give them, there's a level of subjectivity and luck there, based on who you get. Dude, this is a super valuable experience for me. Well, I'm glad. That's the only reason I make these things, so I'm glad it's helpful. Was your board exam in person or virtual? My board exam was virtual, which I gotta say was kind of awful. I wish it had been in person. I think I would have done better in person with physical paper in front of me, because you lose a lot of time in the virtual scenario, the virtual setup, and it's really like weird because you have to kind of have a tripod like right here with a camera staring at your screen, and like the whole time I was nervous I was gonna bump the tripod and the camera was gonna fall, and and I'd lose time, and so I wish it was in person. If they ever bring in person back, I might consider retaking it, but I don't, because I think I could manage that situation a whole lot better. But no, mine was virtual, and you lose a lot of time clicking, because you kind of have to like remote into one of their desktops, and you kind of lag a bit when you're there, so you gotta get used to that. You lose some time because of that. And I had a situation where I accidentally like minimized the screen, and so I lost about I don't know, maybe a minute because of that, which was frustrating too. Um, but yeah, I mean, it is what it is. In person or virtual, you can pass either way. But I personally, I would have much preferred to do in person if it was available for me. Have you taken the data architecture cert? Is it similar to this one in the length and complexity? The data architecture cert is it's just unless there's one I'm not aware of. It's just a multiple choice exam, so it was one of in my opinion of the architecture certs, it was one of the easier ones. And no, it doesn't compare to the CTA in any way. It's way easier. System architect, sorry, I see later down there, not data, I meant system. System architect, they just give you after you pass a certain amount of certs, right? So that one is just a kind of a gimme, but but all the certs leading up to that, they were, I don't want to say they weren't challenging. They certainly were challenging, but they're not comparable to the CTA at all. Would love to see some architecture videos, says Andrew. Yeah, for sure. There will be at least, I would say probably 6 this year. I don't want to promise anything, but bare minimum, there's going to be that amount. But I've got to kind of, I have them all written down. I need to kind of prioritize which ones I think will be most valuable, and then kind of figure out, do I want to make them longer or shorter? Because I think the architecture ones kind of serve themselves better as shorter videos, but I've noticed that people don't actually like they prefer the longer videos. So I'm kind of trying to figure out, how do I structure them and what is the best course for architecture videos. So we'll see. I'll probably experiment with it a little bit. Oh, and I see one of these people that asked a question is Daniel. I answered his question. Okay, was your board in person or virtual? If you didn't know, he's volunteered to make videos. So you're going to see a video from Daniel here soon, which is amazing. So thank you so much, Daniel, for all the work and help that you have done, over the past month or two. Really, really awesome. I really, really, really appreciate it. Mind talking about your future video plans for the channel. Just wondered if you were going to pivot from the Apex Masterclass now that you're back. What is the best way to support you? I am going to do a couple things for sure. The first is I never released a video about just like kind of the basics of Apex test classes, which I just realized like right before I started to study, and I kind of couldn't believe it. I've done things like mock, how to do mocking and all that kind of stuff, but I had never gone through like all the basics. So the first thing I'm going to do is put that video out because I want that to be out there and be free and be able to be a useful resource for people. I also plan to continue the LWC kind of quick tips because I think people seem to really enjoy those, and I've got about 100 of them written down, so I'm hoping to do a bunch more of those. And then as far as am I going to pivot away from the Apex Masterclass stuff, most of the Apex Masterclass, at least the beginner stuff, is actually done. I just kind of moved from the smaller episodic ones, episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, to longer form videos. So you'll see that there's like a complete guide to Apex triggers. That's like every single episode of the Apex Masterclass trigger tutorials that I was going to do, just all in one like 2.5 hour long video. And it was kind of my first experiment with longer form videos because I noticed that the episodic ones weren't doing as well as like my previous ones had, and I kind of took a cue from other YouTube tutorial creators that were kind of working in the same space. And people seem to love the longer form ones, so that's kind of where I took it with the development tutorials, is in those longer form ones. But most of the beginner ones are there. The other content that I really want to do is the the design patterns series that I never got to finish. I primarily stopped on that because I got a lot of offers to do a lot of things, and it was taking a lot of time because it's really hard. It's really hard to take a more complicated topic like that and figure out how to make it easily digestible, right? So, and I want to make it. My goal with all these videos is to make a video that takes a technical topic that seems really complicated and makes it really simple. Because I've always had trouble unless I break it down to a really simple idea of kind of capturing how to truly use this in its, to its full potential. So that's another one I want to do. But outside of that, I do kind of want to focus more of the videos outside of those two areas are going to be focused on Lightning Web Components and then architecture type stuff. Mostly around the architecture for Sales and Service Cloud and Experience Cloud. So I'm probably going to start with either Service or Experience Cloud. I'm going to actually probably put out a poll soon that you guys will be able to vote on. But I'm going to kind of focus on those clouds and their architecture and the features that they have available to them. First, because I think those are most widely used, and I think there's a lot that I could create that would actually be beneficial. Hopefully that helps, but maybe that gives you an idea of where I hope to go. Pedro, I would love to have your feedback for best mock-ups and resources you recommend to learn from to become a better solution architect. I mean, the best way to become a better solution architect, in my opinion, is to get exposed to a lot of scenarios. So that's one of the things that I kind of like about consulting, is that you kind of get exposed to a whole bunch of stuff, right? And there's no limit to the amount of stuff that you might see out there. There's a lot of crazy things out there, and some of them I'd love to talk about, but I don't want to breach any faith or confidence. They all have their different. They don't really want me to tell you all the intricacies about their systems, obviously. But there's that's the best way to do it in my opinion. But if you're just talking about studying for the CTA, I don't necessarily think you have to be exposed to an enormous amount of things to potentially become a CTA. You just have to, I would say, focus on the core platform features, as well as some of the managed package add-ons like Lightning Scheduler, Field Service Lightning, kind of CPQ. You need to know CPQ. I don't know. Maybe there really are scenarios with CPQ. I have no idea. But based on the publicly released scenarios, I don't think you're ever going to get into a situation where you have to use CPQ. But do I think you need to work on 1 million projects before you take the CTA? Not necessarily, but it won't hurt. I just don't think you necessarily need to do it. And outside of just doing the work and figuring things out and exposing yourself via consultancy firm to those things, the other thing that I think is important, I think is extremely important to become good at what you're doing, is you need to find something that you want to build, that interests you. And then you're going to become a better solution architect because you, or technical architect or whatever, or developer, it doesn't really matter, because really it's all those things. Because you're fully invested in this idea that you have that you want to bring to life. And there's no better way to completely immerse yourself in something and to learn something than to build something that you truly yourself want to build. So, I've done that a lot. I've built a lot of things that I want to build. And I think that's why I've been able to, get better and better and better. So, and I never stopped that. As you can see, I've got, like I mentioned, like you guys have seen, I'm sure, I've got the other channel, the Moonrise Mountain channel, where I'm trying to make my own game. That is going to help me, and it seems like that's completely disconnected from Salesforce. That's going to help me so much from a development standpoint, from a architecture, networking standpoint, all these kind of things, because I'm going, I have a vision for what I want to make, and it's going to, I'm kind of a person that once I start it, I really, really don't want to stop it. If I have a personal attachment to it, so it's going to help me a bunch. So that's what I always recommend. Find something you love and do that work, and you'll become better because of it. Especially if you network along the way and ask other people. Asking other people and that at all. I ask people questions every single day. I don't know everything, and the only reason I get a little better and a little better is because of all these other wonderful people that help me learn things every day. Oh, we got Salesforce Emily in here. Hey, this is if you haven't seen Salesforce, before I answer this question, if you haven't seen Salesforce Emily's channel, absolutely excellent channel. Probably my favorite administration-based channel out there. I am not gonna lie, watch plenty of videos to remind myself of things. I even mentioned to her when I was taking, I was studying for the CTA. I was like, if I manage to pass the CTA, you're gonna get at least a quarter, half the credit for it or something, because I watched a lot of her videos to remind me of the click paths and to memorize things and to think about things. So if you haven't checked it out, her channel is even bigger than mine, but definitely check it out because great administration tutorials there. But her question is, did they compensate with extra time for the virtual instead of the in-person exam? No. The answer to that is they do not give you any extra time, despite that little amount of lag. I mean, ultimately the lag, I think it maybe burns 10 minutes, maybe. So, could they have given me an extra 10 minutes? Sure. Would it have made a difference? I have no idea. But no, there's no extra compensation for a virtual. The only thing that I'm aware of, and I'm not sure that they still do this, is that for non-native English speakers, they give them an extra 30 minutes to solve this scenario. I think that's the only extra time compensation that is out there. What is the most difficult project in our implementation that you've worked on? That's a good question. All of them have their own difficulties. I worked at a health-based company, although what I did was primarily service-oriented and sales-oriented stuff. It really had nothing to do with Health Cloud or anything like that. And their implementation was interesting mostly because, and it was challenging. I mean, it was an interesting implementation, and it was challenging because it was just whoever first built it really didn't know what they were doing, and it worked, but it really didn't work. They had reached a size where, I think when they originally built it, they were smaller. When they got bigger, it got to a point where they couldn't do anything. So that was one of it was difficult because I got brought on to kind of fix the past, right, and make it better for the future. And I got to see, I mean, everything you could think of. Everything. I mean, one of the most interesting things that I saw on this project was somebody was really lazy, and they didn't want to create test classes at all. And so what they did was, it was kind of genius. I'd never thought about it, but what they did is they created an Apex class. It had like a ton of lines, like an enormous amount of lines, right? It was huge. I don't remember how long it was. And then they wrote a test class just to test that one Apex class, and that one Apex class consisted of that it running was 75% of the code base tested, which was horrible. So they had like no tests, and I created an enormous amount of tests during that time, and refactored a trigger that required recursion 4 times, so it had to recall itself 4 times to do its job. And there were some other things that were interesting there as well. As far as like from a system architecture standpoint, outside of code, right? I got to do a lot of really interesting things there. I got to build some integrations. I did an enormous amount of code refactoring. And, I was really interested in that project for some reason, just because of how much was broken, how much they wanted to do, that I spent an enormous amount of overtime just kind of like building things out. It was fun. As far as a system architecture standpoint, I worked for Hallmark for a couple years. And that one was one of the, of the ones that I can actually talk about to some extent. There are some that I just can't talk about at all. Unfortunately, they're very interesting, but I can't speak to them. But that was a pretty cool one. I worked a lot of hours, but I had a really good team at Hallmark. They were really fun, and we got to build some really interesting implementations where we integrated with some of their systems. And I got to work with B2C and B2B commerce a little bit, which I can say I don't really want to work with again, but it was interesting at the time. It was my first exposure to Marketing Cloud as well. So I got to build some really cool things at Hallmark, but yeah, I don't know. I wish I could go more in depth, but I feel like in a setting like this, I would talk too much about things I maybe shouldn't. So, what do you feel like were the most underrated, overrated resources when studying for the CTA exam? That's tough. I I don't know. So I used a lot of resources. I think that they were all very helpful to some extent. I think as far as maybe the one that was, to me, I don't know that it's overhyped to the community at large or anything, but to me, originally a lot of people were like, you should watch the Ladies Be Architects videos to get a lot of information. And not to say they weren't helpful, because they certainly were, but I think it's not as helpful as you might hope, right? Like, you get a good understanding of how to present and what to present and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think it's, necessarily the best resource. The other thing that I felt like was a little bit of it was a little bit of overkill was like, yeah, there are some other scenarios out there that CTAs have done and posted on like Apex Hours or whatever else. I felt like, some of the Apex Hours ones, that like people have maybe taken way longer than 3 hours to solve a scenario, or they'd solved the scenario so many times it was easy. So there's a little bit of that where, like, I feel like the representation of what you would actually end up with for your Salesforce scenario was, for your CTA board, was a little bit misleading. I thought that there were a couple resources. The CTA Gang of 4 resource, I felt like every scenario they did with somebody, it was a real representation of what they may have actually done in 3 hours, and what you might experience on a board. Like they've done a good job with the videos that they've produced and the content they've produced, as far as free content, to really get you a good view into what you would probably produce and what you'll probably be presented with. So as far as free resources, I think that's a good one. There's also the kind of like, I'm trying to remember the name of the Slack channel. Let me bring it up here. There's the Architect Ohana Slack channel that everybody kind of raves about, at least CTA people. I'd say that is very valuable just because you can kind of search it and look through it. But if you're expecting to get anything out of that, you're going to have to work for it, right? Like you've got to go find your study partners. You've got to go find a CTA and either pay them to help you or beg them to help you, or I don't really know. But it's valuable in the sense that there's a whole bunch of information there that is well organized. So that's worth taking a look into for free resources. The other thing that people maybe don't want to hear, maybe they do want to hear, I don't really know, is after I took the exam, the whole time prior to taking the exam, I felt like I'd signed up for Flow Republic because I wanted to take it because people said it was wonderful, and I wanted a really good shot at the CTA. The whole time when I took Flow Republic, I did all the work. I took it very seriously, but the whole time I was kind of thinking like, man, the public scenarios they released are nothing in comparison to these scenarios. The Flow Republic scenarios are vague. They're much longer. They're harder to solve. Surely this is overkill, right? Like that was my feeling, is like this is just too much. You don't really need that. I'm convinced at this point, if you want any shot at beating the roulette wheel that is the CTA board, as in, well, who knows what scenario you're going to get, you got to take that. I don't think there's any resource better than it. Truthfully, at the end of the day, what Seb put together, along with, at least I think with some help from past students and with some help from Johan Furman, there is nothing comparable out there. I mean, even my internal CTA program, as wonderful as it was, because I got to actually practice with CTAs all the time, which was amazing. Really, a really great experience. It can't compare, because they clearly know what to expect. They clearly know what the worst case scenario is, and they are absolutely for sure prepping you for the worst case scenario, not a mega print scenario, which in my opinion might be the best case scenario, at least compared to what I got. I'd say I would have loved to see a mega print scenario in comparison to what I got. So those are the big ones. And then of course, if you can get into a bigger consultancy firm and you can get them to back you for a CTA, that is huge, right? They give you an enormous amount of resources. Accenture gave me a huge amount of resources. I'm super grateful to them, because I don't, even though Flow Republic was exceptionally useful, there's a lot I wouldn't have, there's a lot of other pieces of the puzzle there that they help put together. I will say my only like kind of complaint about Flow Republic is just the way that they have you do presentations. I wish that they would have done like a couple times. I actually did get the opportunity to do this, but I don't know that you always, I don't know. I wish that every time that they had you present to a CTA, you presented the full scenario. They kind of do things different, and I think it was beneficial in some regards. But I think I would have benefited more if our one-on-ones weren't just 1 hour. They were like a full 2 hours, like a full 45 minutes for the mock, 40 minutes for Q&A, and then a few, half an hour or something for feedback. That was really my only complaint. But what they did do during that time, where they kind of honed in on particular requirements and how you presented, was was still extremely useful. So I don't want to discount it too much. That's just my only, if I was going to suggest one thing to Seb when I'm assuming he's going to eventually reopen Flow Republic. It would be, if you can, and I know it's got to be hard to find CTAs to do this with you, if you can get somebody to spend 3 hours or 2 hours instead of 1 hour to do the whole scenario and give feedback kind of in a more natural way, that would be the only thing that I'd suggest. But those are my biggest resources for sure. All of them, again, even Ladies Be Architects, still useful, but I'd say that fell last on my list at the end of the day. And then after that, it's probably CTA Gang of Four. For sure, if you want a really good view into what to truly expect the day of, that was great. And then Architect Ohana, internal training programs, and then Flow Republic. Honestly, at the end of the day, that was it. I don't think anybody prepares you better. I think I don't get anybody. I'm not getting paid to say that either. Seb's not paying me. I'm not on the payroll. I've paid him to experience it and to then come tell you that in my opinion, it prepares you very well. Great to hear about the new content you're creating. Hey, I'm excited to make it. I'm very excited to be back. It's probably the biggest, one of the biggest reasons that I really don't want to take this again is because this whole time I've missed this so much. It's kind of, I haven't loved not doing this for this long, and I've also not been thrilled that I couldn't do some other development projects that I wanted to do, which again, the CTA is very useful. You learn a lot of stuff, but it's super high level. In my opinion, that's because I like to code, right? But I miss the code, so I haven't been able to do it in a long time now. I want you to see my company's instance of Salesforce. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of companies' instances of Salesforce that probably look the same way that yours do, AMP. You're not alone. I've seen a lot. Igor says, I was once working on a class with 2K lines of code and just 3 methods. Yeah, that's awful. You don't want 2,000 lines of code and just 3 methods for sure. For sure. You're not going to be able to refactor that or add any new functionality in anytime soon. It's gonna, especially if you don't have good tests, which is really hard to test. 700 line methods? Not an easy thing to do. Lewis has asked me, what's your take on generative AI making its way into Salesforce, and will you be taking the Salesforce AI cert in the future? I'm not going to take an AI cert. My feeling on generative AI, or just AI in general, is that AI has been around for a long time. A long time. It's getting hyped to death because now one company made one thing that kind of works. Like, it works kind of, but it also kind of doesn't. It depends on the situation that you get yourself in, whether it's going to work or it's not going to work or whatever. OpenAI has been around to some extent for much longer than it's been publicly available, right? So I think it's getting hyped to death because companies know that they can milk a ton of money out of you because you're interested in it right now. It's like your typical YouTube channel, right? Or your typical anything that's just purely trying to make money. It's trending. It's interesting. It's a big deal. So they're gonna milk it for what it's worth. What I think is, in the future, AI will definitely take over jobs. There will be less of a need for a huge amount of staff. But as far as like, you know, is it gonna immediately take over any of our jobs? I don't really think so. I think it's gonna be kind of like I assume Google was to some extent when Google first came out. I mean, at some point, developers were all using books, right? And then Google came out, and I'm sure there were plenty of people that were like, "Wow, Google, maybe that'll make us less relevant." Ultimately, what it did was make us more productive. So I think that AI will help make us more productive at the end of the day. I don't necessarily fear for my job or fear for other people's jobs in this industry, but I do think it'll make us faster and probably better at what we do. Austin has asked, what has driven you to pursue the CTA and stay in the Salesforce ecosystem as opposed to branching off into more general software development? As far as why I pursued the CTA, there were just so many. There were a lot of people that thought I could do it, and there was a lot of people that supported me in doing it, and so I thought it was a good time to take a shot at it. And I was interested just to see, I've always been okay at tests. I've not really been overwhelmed by them necessarily, and I've always found that you can learn something from it no matter what the outcome is. So I wanted to take a shot at it and see what I can make of it. Obviously, there's huge financial incentive to some extent to achieve a CTA, but you can, I think, achieve that same financial potential either way. Maybe you make it there a little bit faster with the CTA. I don't know. And as far as why I stayed in the Salesforce system as opposed to branching off into more general software development, I just kind of liked it. I did do Java development and PHP development before I did Salesforce development. And what I can say is I felt like in Salesforce, it forced me to get better as a developer, which is weird to say, right? But because of the platform limitations and because of all the different things that they impose upon you, it really forces you to learn all these best practices, especially if you get into a larger org like I've primarily worked in. And so I thought it was really beneficial to my career as a software developer, actually. So I've kind of stuck with it. Every once in a while, I think about doing other software development stacks or different languages or whatever. I'm relatively decent with a handful of other ones. So, but when it comes down to it, I've just enjoyed my time. I feel like I can focus on all the things that I want to focus on, like true develop, like just actually writing the code and developing the UI and whatever else, right? Instead of worrying about a lot of other things you have to worry about outside of this ecosystem. So, there's a lot more to worry about when you go into non-Salesforce environments, as far as how do you spin up a sandbox environment? How do you how do you manage your servers? How do you manage the server loads? All that kind of stuff, right? And you have to work with a lot of different teams, a lot of different people. Sometimes you have to do it yourself. And really, the only thing that I ever really, really loved doing was writing the code, especially UI stuff. And I just thought it wasn't too bad a place to be. So, all right. Any other questions? I've run out of questions here. Thought I wasn't going to run out for a while there, but any other questions? Otherwise, I might get out of here. I guess it's been an hour and 21 minutes now. I am getting hungry. All right, guys. Well, if there aren't any more questions out there, I'll give you a couple minutes here. I'm just going to talk. Maybe give me a couple more questions. I'm only going to do this for about 10 more minutes anyway. But if there aren't any more questions out there, then I'll just kind of wrap things up. I see somebody sent something here. Hi, Matt. Just understand, is knowing not all but most of the product knowledge mandatory in order to start CTA prep? I would say you want a generally solid understanding of all the administrative capabilities of the core clouds. Sales, Service, Experience Cloud, and the limits that impact them, right? You also want a general understanding of kind of overall system architecture, like how you might design this, and a general understanding of integration architecture. But what I will say is that a lot of the CTA exam is not, I would say from my experience anyway, and again, this is just my experience, but it's not entirely based in reality, right? Like in a CTA scenario, you have an infinite budget. So really what your goal is to take their situation and give them a best case outcome. Not necessarily a realistic outcome, but a best case outcome. So it's kind of like, you need to understand what an ETL tool is and an ESB is, and when you should use those, when you shouldn't use them, and what mutual transport layer security is and why you would use that. The different authentication flows that are out there that they're relatively easy to get the hang of. So the long story short is, you have to know all of it? Not necessarily. But I do think you have to have a good grasp of what Salesforce capabilities are, and a good grasp of how to manage communications between a variety of systems, right? I think those are the biggest, I'd say those are the biggest things. And then just the limitations of the platform, that factors in a huge amount. So, but you don't necessarily need to know like all the intricate development details that I would know, or like how the platform actually works or anything along those lines. So, or even necessarily how you would actually facilitate an integration between system A and system B. So just like how you would code it to work. I mean, you need to know how to facilitate. You don't need to know how to actually set it up, which I think is one of the most important parts, but you don't really need to know. How's the family? My family is great. And they are the biggest reason I have been able to, create Coding with the Force. They're the biggest reason I was able to try to do the CTA exam. I have the most wonderful, supportive family, the most wonderful, supportive wife, and I got a couple of great kids. Some, the kids, they take up a lot. I'd probably make more content if the kids weren't around, but I love the kids, so I'm very happy that they take me away from this stuff and make me focus on stuff that's a lot more fun, like soccer and football, or soccer regularly is called football everywhere else, and I'm talking about American football. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, it's great. I am extremely lucky to have the family that I have. Are you selling the dumps for the CTA? Not a chance, man. No, I don't look at the dumps. I would never sell the dumps. I know you're joking, but just so the world knows, I have never been, in that space. So, unfortunately, no, guys, you're gonna have to look somewhere else for CTA dumps. It's not me. Is there a Salesforce feature on the roadmap that I'm most looking forward to? Going to guess based on your AI answer that you're not drinking the GPT Kool-Aid. I mean, I'm interested in what the Salesforce GPT thing comes out with, but like, I don't know. I think it's kind of the hype train AI thing. I will see. Maybe it's really useful. Maybe it's not, or maybe it's like Salesforce blockchain, which came out and then they dumped it like 6 months later, and you can't even find it anymore. I went to the Dreamforce where they were like hyping up Salesforce blockchain, and it was pretty interesting, and now it's gone. So who knows? Maybe Salesforce GPT will work and be awesome, or maybe it'll end up the way of Salesforce blockchain, that hype train. So we'll see. All right, and I think we are out of questions. So it has been wonderful, guys. I am not going to have a taco today, someone pointed out. Although I do, if you didn't know, eat an enormous amount of Taco Bell, probably far too much. I love it. I don't know about you guys, but Taco Bell is where it's at. So, yeah, but I'm probably gonna go upstairs and I'll probably make a hot dog or something. I like hot dogs. I like all the cheap food. I'll answer that real quick, Pedro. I started I think a little over 8 years ago now. Like 8 years and 3 months or something like that. So it's been a long time. At least in my opinion. I've been a developer for far longer than that. 12 years, I think now, but 8 years in Salesforce. Chipotle doesn't kill Taco Bell, man. I mean, it's good, don't get me wrong, but Taco Bell is that heat. So it's that heat. Anyway, thank you all so much for coming and talking to me, and I hope that this helped in some way out there, somebody. If you have any more questions, obviously you can leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. If you want to hang out and talk some more, later this evening I might end up doing some live streaming on my Moonrise Mountain channel, so you're welcome to come over there, watch me do some game development. I'm definitely going to do that at some point later this week, so go check that out if you haven't, and I'll be able to talk to you a whole lot more there throughout the week, year, whatever. But that is it for this evening. And yeah, anyway, you'll see several videos very soon. I am setting up a whole bunch of camera equipment here, so I'm a little bit delayed, but I'm going to have this kind of studio set up this week, and then I will be recording the Apex test classes, and Daniel's video will be out very soon, and a couple more LWC shorts will be out. So anyway, guys, great to speak to you all. I will see you all next time.